guys, and welcome to this Friday night's version episode, whatever we are, version episode, doesn't really matter. Welcome to the lounge. It is our lovely, lovely time where we're finally coming out of Mercury retrograde. Are you guys excited about that? And we have an excellent show tonight. It's all about breaking patterns, awakening your Kundalini energy, looking at your I always say that wrong, like say chakras. It's not chakras. Hold on. My hair is bothering me. Hold on a second. It's awakening your chakras, balancing your chakras, finding out what your chakras are, finding out how you can balance these things out and break the patterns that are holding you back, because we are moving into a new era. We are moving into a time where things are going to get better. New beginnings, new chances, new opportunities. What maybe hasn't been available to you in the past 15 years, because there has been a 15-year window of growth and tough challenges and changes and tough lessons. The school of hard knocks is what I call the past 15 years. And the past 2 years, with everything that's gone on in the world, it's preparing us. It's preparing us for these changes. It's preparing us for the 5D. We already kind of transitioned to the 5D, but now we're integrating. And so a lot of people that are sensitive, that are intuitive, have had those. We talked about trauma so much in the show and how it can impact our connection to our body, and how most of us who are intuitive, mediums, energy workers, light workers, we sometimes feel a little bit safer out of our body and disconnected, right? So for us to come into our body is sometimes a little bit difficult for a lot of us who are more comfortable staying out in the ether and talk to those on the other side and connecting on an intuitive level. A lot of people who work with trauma, or people that have had trauma in the past, say, oh, trauma blocks intuition. I don't agree with that, because I believe a lot of us can, access that because we're safer being out of our bodies. And so a lot of us stay in that world. But in order to be balanced, in order to be centered, and in order to manifest our goals and dreams and not have them shoot up and then come back down and shoot up and come back down, we have to be centered and integrated in our body and safe in our home vessel, in our physical body. And a lot of us have not been. So a lot of you guys are probably wondering, how do I break these cycles, whether it be relationships, career, health, following the same patterns over and over again? We've discussed this many times on the show. We've had a lot of different people on the show talking about this, but I think that tonight's guest is going to be someone that's going to shed a lot of light on this topic for us and give us some practical tools to get us to understand that really it's not your fault that you can't really get past a certain point, or you keep cycling. There's no shame around that. You may have grown up with shame or anxiety or have trouble accepting that a lot of this is just not your fault. So I have to put it out there that way. And it's not your fault that you can't change it. But what is in your power is that when you're given the tools, you're given the resources, and you're given that guidance, that it is your responsibility to take that opportunity and go with it and trust it, because it's not going to be easy. The work isn't easy, but once you make it through, the promise of that work is a feeling of feeling connected again. How many of you have been feeling disconnected from yourself, from the world, from other people for so long, and kind of just been a cycle of a rat race, over and over again, running through your tasks every day, trying to succeed in your job, just running from opportunity to opportunity and not really feeling connected, and saying to yourself, there's a void. I need to fix it. I need to fill that void. And a lot of us fill that void with the things that aren't really going to fill that void permanently. And then you're left with loneliness, and that loneliness can be something that is very hard to get out of. So we are going to try to enlighten you tonight. And tonight, I'd love to talk about who we're going to have on the show. Lisa Erickson, she is an author. She's an energy worker, meditation teacher, specializing in women's energetics and sexual trauma healing. So obviously, if you're watching the show, if that sexual trauma doesn't if the sexual trauma piece doesn't apply to you, that's fine. We're going to be talking about how to break those cycles, even if that's not a piece of it for you. She has trained in multiple contemplative traditions and energy healing modalities and is certified in mindfulness meditation instruction, Kundalini activation, which I'm very interested in hearing about, and trauma sensitivity. So any trauma, this could be your parents divorced when you were young, or you had a family member who was an alcoholic, or you may have moved and been taken away from your friends and family with an abrupt move when you were a kid. It doesn't have to be something major. It still causes that disconnection. Lisa is a member of the International Association of Meditation Instructors, the American Holistic Health Association, the Energy Medicine Practitioners Association, and the Breathe Network, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting holistic healing for sexual trauma survivors. She is also the creator of a popular DailyOM course, Awakening Your Feminine Chakras. Wow, this is exciting. And she wrote a book, Chakra Empowerment for Women. And I would love to bring her to the show. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Hi, Marissa. I'm great. And your introduction just got me so fired up because everything you said about seeing that many people who've experienced trauma actually develop their intuitive abilities. Partially, they're more comfortable actually being out rather than grounding. This is so much of what I work with. So I think we have a ton to talk about.
Awesome. Well, we talked a little bit prior because I love talking to my guests prior to the show. And then I wish that I could have aired that conversation because we were just going off. But you were talking about people who, like, we all cycle. We all have periods of our life where there's one area of life in the pie chart that is just like, why do we keep doing that same thing over and over again? And each time we go through the cycle, it seems to have a worse ending or a worse situation. And it's like, we might be, just for example, we might be great in our business as women or men, doesn't matter, but we might be great in business and have clear boundaries and don't people please. And we can have we can make decisions. But then for some women, they could be so successful, so beautiful, so, wonderful in their jobs, and yet are having trauma bonded relationships. And then they get out of one and they go into the next one that's actually has a worse outcome, and then the next one, and then the shame and anxiety, and they start hiding it from their friends and family, and then all of a sudden they don't want to be in this world anymore. You know what I mean? There's that shame and anxiety. So when you're struggling with that type of pattern, a lot of my clients, they'll say, hey, like, they'll come to me and they'll want a reading, right? And this is why I started to get into this work myself, was because I couldn't help my clients because all I was seeing was their pathway. Like, because all I could see is the pathway that they're choosing, basically. So they come to me for intuitive. They say, oh, I'm just getting out of this horrible relationship. When am I going to meet that next, they want to know, when are they going to meet the next person that's going to save them? When are they going to meet the next person that's going to be their end all be all? So I could say, okay, well, in 2021, I see this man with red hair and his name is, Kevin, and, and they'll call me back and say, oh my God, everything happened. But then it gets destroyed again. And they'll come back to me and say, oh, Marissa, well, this happened. Oh, when am I going to meet the next person? I realized like halfway through my career that I'm not helping them. I'm seeing their cycle. I'm seeing what they're cycling. So I could say to them, and I've said to many of them, here's path A and here's path B. Path B would be better, but you're not going to listen to anything that I have to say, and you're going to choose path A. And they're like, you know what? You're right. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm like, well, and I couldn't understand why they're seeking the insight, but they can't make the change.
Yeah.
So this is what I've been struggling with. And that's why I decided to go down that path myself of my own transformational work to find that answer. And it took a long time to get there. And it does take a lot of work. There's no like energy worker or psychic or medium that could just wave a magic wand and give you relief from your anxiety for your and have this sort of magical future just appear, right?
Yeah. No, don't we all wish we had that magic wand? I mean, I wish I had that. I wish I could gift every client with that, right?
Right. Right. So what would you say? Mm-hmm. Why do these cycles happen? Is trauma the root of this?
Yeah, very often it is. And it can be, I think what's interesting from when you're working from an energy body perspective is the different levels that trauma may come in at. So when we talk about trauma within the psychological community, we are talking about experiences that you had in this lifetime that you may or may not remember. And it could also be collective trauma, like the pandemic that we just went through, impacted people in different ways depending on their situation and may have been quite traumatic, right? Different phases of it. But then we are really starting to understand, and from an energy body perspective, this has always been on the table, ancestral trauma. You can carry forward trauma from prior generations, particularly your parents, particularly if they didn't speak of it. Sometimes you carry it forward, right? They've done studies on Holocaust survivors, for example, and how their children will actually manifest trauma symptoms, even though they themselves were not in a concentration camp if their parent was a survivor. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. If you believe in past lives, you can potentially have past life trauma you're carrying forward. So you can have things that are impacting you that you may or may not be able to get to the source. What you can always identify, though, is what are your patterns now, right? Whether you ever know how you got to this place, what are your patterns now? Those are mapped out energetically. It's like software written into you. It's your default response. It's your default choice that you're going to do A versus B. And in order to get yourself to change your choice, you have to change yourself on that, to rewrite that software, right? It might require some deep healing. It might require some very deep work to rewrite your default responses to situations. And I think there's different trauma profiles, and you named one very well. And I've worked with many women who are this way, who have experienced this, very successful in their career, struggle a lot in intimate relationships and sometimes friendships as well. And often from a chakra perspective, I call that like navel chakra hyper dependence. It's like at some point there's this decision of like, I will be self-sufficient and I will focus on power and sort of the things I can control. And so that can lead to great success in career, right? Because you're very driven. You're very much in that navel in terms of willpower, in terms of organization, in terms of discipline, in terms of professionalism. But that doesn't mean other aspects of you are healed. There can be a lot of heart and sacral issues that you're not sourcing all of that energy. And so then that is reflected in a lot of challenges with relationships. So that's often how that split comes out. That's one trauma pattern, is being very self-sufficient and organizationally strong, but not strong in other areas.
Why would that navel, would this be the solar plexus area, or would this be the...
Yeah, you know what, I should clarify that I use the third chakra is navel to solar plexus, but I use the focal point as the navel. So I mean third chakra, which is the power chakra, right? And the second chakra being the second chakra is the womb chakra for women, which is the emotional center. So what'll happen is someone's not grounded in their root and their sacral. They're not comfortable perhaps with all of those energies. Happens a lot with sexual trauma in particular. There's sometimes a disassociation from those lower chakras. And it's like doing everything from the place of self-sufficiency, drive, personal power, control, trying to feel safe through control. Those abilities can map out quite well in a professional career, right? Being really in that driven, power-based place. But it's really exhausting because there's no sourcing of the energy coming up through the root and the sacral. It's like a disconnection from those bottom two. Now, other trauma survivors can be much more disassociated, right? Like they're more way up here, and that's a whole different issue.
Okay, so if you're dealing with someone that does have that sexual trauma, are those chakras from that trauma just shut down, and then you're just existing from those top level chakras? Like they just shut down because of the trauma?
It varies. So some people really disassociate from those chakras. Some people, it can be, they can engage with certain aspects of the chakra, but not others. So you could have someone who's very creative, but really cannot engage in sexual activity at all, right? So they may be accessing it. Well, because we talk about chakras being open or closed, but it's really not that simple, right? All the chakras have levels and aspects, and so you may access certain aspects and not others. So it's not always the case that someone's second chakra is totally shut down. And someone will say that to me, I'm very creative. My second chakra is really open, right? But there's other aspects to it. Same with the root chakra. People will say, oh, I exercise all the time. I'm really into my physical body, so I'm grounded, right? But it's really, what is your relationship to your body is your root chakra. And so just exercising a lot doesn't mean you're grounded, right? So you can have certain aspects open and certain aspects not. But in general, there's often some sort of disconnection from those lower chakras. Some people then might really hyper rely on that third chakra. Like I said, personal power, control as the path to safety. Others might be up higher and they're maybe spiritually bypassing and disassociating because it feels more comfortable to be almost completely out of their body a lot of the time. Other people, they're in the heart and it's like one relationship after another, seeking validation, right? So I think there's a lot of different ways it can play out depending on the person's individual circumstances, what trauma they experienced.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of people that I've worked with and people that kind of just don't even realize that maybe they've had a sexual trauma, and that they said, oh, they've gone to certain therapists and they're like, oh, have you this, you're playing it out like you have. What about the people that have no knowledge of anything you're talking about and no knowledge that they even have this trauma, or the people that feel like they did, but they can't remember it? How do these people even get started with coming into that, realizing that these are the centers that need to be balanced, and what will balancing those centers actually do?
Yeah. So you don't need to know from an energy work perspective how a pattern developed in order to change it. What you do have to be able to identify is something that needs to change, right? So you do need to be able to identify, oh, I do this over and over and over again. I always end up in a situation where I totally change myself to what my partner wants, and I totally give myself up over and over and over, right? And I totally lose myself. That could be one pattern. Or I have a pattern of getting into a relationship and then it's going well, but then I start getting more and more angry with my partner and eventually push them away. Or I continuously attract a certain kind of person, or I am attracted to a certain kind of person. Each time I think it's different, but now when I look back, I look at every single time it's been the same kind of person. They just seem different at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be able to identify that pattern. And once you can't have, you don't need to know how it got there to change it. I think traditional talk therapy functions from that place of, let's rewrite the narrative. And it can be very helpful, but sometimes it's not accessible to you.
No.
And if you're carrying forward ancestral trauma or past life trauma, it may never be accessible to you.
Right.
So I function more from the place of, let's feel it in your body now. Like, what does it feel like when you get triggered into that pattern? And we try to go into a memory or a situation just recently, right? Like if you're working with anxiety, we don't have to go back to the trauma that caused the anxiety. Just tell me what you felt in the grocery store yesterday when the guy behind you got too close to you. Because when we can feel it in your energy body, we can work with it right then.
Right. And I've done a lot of work myself with polyvagal theory and coming back to and that was so helpful because I talk about this a lot, on the show, that I do struggle with complex trauma. And that's really difficult to heal. And I mean, I spent years in just traditional talk stuff. It just didn't work. It just didn't work. Nothing changed in my patterns from talking about what was bothering me. Nothing changed. But I find that the work of Stephen Porges and the polyvagal work of learning, I had no idea that my nervous system was so dysregulated. And I had no idea until I started paying attention to my body, because I was so outside of my body, that my nervous system was in a state of activation pretty much 90% of the time, but different states of activation. I didn't know what dissociation was. And maybe a lot of people listening don't know what it is. Can we explain to them? Maybe you'll be better at this at explaining what is dissociation? What is nervous system dysregulation?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about disassociation. It's really a survival strategy that we develop at some point to survive discomfort, right? So if it feels in a way some emotion or experience too uncomfortable for us to stay fully present for, we find a way to not be present. And childhood abuse survivors, for example, might develop certain patterns of certain places in their mind they go, or they may, certain kinds of daydreams. It can be songs. It can be places we go. From a energetic, spiritual perspective, literally people can almost like leave their body. They might describe it as, I just sort of space out, and they don't really know where they go, but they're kind of going, they found like this safe place that has become habitual. And then it means any sort of anxiety that's triggered, even something that from the outside might seem like not a very threatening situation, if it triggers any anxiety in their system, it's a habit now to do that, to disconnect in some way. Other people, it can be busy mind. It can be mental disassociation. People can become very cerebral, and that's a form of disassociating. So there's a lot of different ways it can play out. Then you have your nervous system dysregulation. You know, we talk about fight, flight, or freeze, and each of these has an actual nervous system, something that happens in your body, right? In terms of how you respond. You might go into hypervigilance, where you are in a state, you're triggered into a state where you're just scanning for danger as if in that moment you're about to be attacked in an everyday situation, and you're on such hyper alert. Your whole nervous system is on hyper alert, right? Or you can go into a kind of shutdown or paralysis stage where things might feel in slow motion, or you feel as if you can't really respond. So it plays out differently for each person, but from an energy body perspective, disassociation usually means a disconnection from the lower chakras, and there's almost an astral, like some part of your awareness is not present. And we're trying to sink you back in and develop your confidence in your capacity to stay fully present, even when uncomfortable.
Right. So being able to hold more intensity, being able to withstand more intensity, because intensity sometimes in the body is what puts people into that state of wanting to be out of themselves. A lot of people that are sensitives or intuitives or mediums, I find, do have trauma in their past.
Exactly.
And I just started to understand this year. I'm looking at everyone I know. I'm like, oh my God, we all, have some sort of struggle. And isn't it interesting that we're most comfortable not being here, like in this, the people that are even better at what they do seem to have more of that comfort being in the body.
Well, and it's interesting because I think there's there's the disassociative part, but there's also, like, if you grew up in a home that didn't feel safe, you may have become highly intuitive and empathic in order to try to stay safe. Like every time you had to walk in your door, you're scanning for, is dad drinking today? Is mom healthy today? Like what, if you're in an environment that's unstable, so you develop your intuitive and empathic skills in order to try to stay safe, right? So I think that's another piece of the reason why you do find people have developed their intuitive skills as a survival mechanism sometimes in response to abuse or trauma.
Right. So when they take that out into the real world of somebody who might come from an alcoholic background, and I want to talk about addiction in the chakras too, and how that plays out. But they're an adult child of an alcoholic, or one of the parents was a drug addict, alcoholic. How do they take that scanning nature and that hypervigilance and that, always looking for danger? What happens to them in their relationship life? What happens to them in their cycles? What kind of relationships do they attract, and what kind of patterns would happen with these people?
Yeah. Well, and there's a few variations. One is if someone has experienced abuse initially, especially when young, continuing to attract abusive partners, because that's their modeling of what relationship means. That's their modeling of intimacy, is that there's always some kind of abuse, right? So they may do that. Sometimes people will go the opposite. They'll manifest relationships that are really safe and platonic, right? Like there's no passion, right? But it feels it's all about safety. They might go for a mentor. They're going for a father figure over and over to try to rewrite that narrative without realizing it. They might go for unavailable. This is something I see a lot, right? Continuously sort of falling for people who are unavailable, either married, committed to someone else, or unavailable emotionally, right? So it can be a pattern of being attracted to someone who's emotionally unavailable because that actually feels safe, then being frustrated that they aren't more emotionally available, right? It's kind of playing that over and over and over. Can be going for the savior, right? So then there's a lot of projection. This person's got it together. They're going to save me. Rarely can anyone ever live up to that long term, right? So I think that's 5 different patterns that I see a lot. And usually someone tends to play out one or the other. Sometimes they move from one to the other. So someone might start in younger years with abusive relationships. They move past that, but then they move into, just kind of really safe relationships that don't feel fulfilling. It's,
So what chakra for these 5 types, is this all within one energy center with these 5 types, or are they all connected to different energy centers? Like what you just described, is that one specific area?
Our relationship patterns like that are mostly, I would be working with the heart, because our relationships are like a mirror of, where we are in terms of that. But the other things like disassociation, that's really about linking into those lower chakras, right? So you're usually going to have a combination of both when you're dealing with abuse. You're going to have a combination of needing to work with grounding and reconnecting with those lower chakras, heart in terms of remapping relationship patterns, often throat in terms of communication patterns, right?
Yes.
If you're a people pleaser, if that's part of it, or if you had developed patterns of, so many people when they experience trauma, especially when they're young, they develop patterns of hiding it. There's a lot of shame involved. So then there's this constant pattern of never actually speaking the truth, speaking what you think will keep you safe, speaking what will, what will please others. And there's no pattern of speaking truth, right? How can intimacy develop in a relationship if you can't ever speak truth, right?
Exactly.
So that's the whole other piece of it. Yeah.
What I find interesting is you were talking about the different people, the unavailable patterns. You were talking about the savior, and then you're talking about the emotionally available, the abuse. People think, well, I stopped dating the abusive people, but now they go to the guy that they have no real interest in, and it's just kind of safe. And then they go to the father figure, and it's like, but let's say if it's just a female, male, we could look at male, female, but let's, for the sake of just talking about it, that person were faced with someone who was totally available, they would probably freak out and run away, right? Because the intensity, they couldn't really handle somebody. And I tell some of my clients this, I'm like, do you realize that you're emotionally unavailable too? And they're like, no, it's the other person. It's the other person. I'm like, well, no, if somebody showed up at your door, they're like, here's all of me ready to go. That feeling would probably scare them, right? Would be too intense if somebody were really available, and they would probably, what would happen to them? They were faced with something healthy like that. Yeah,
they would, whatever their go-to pattern is for pushing people away, right?
Okay, the sabotage.
Which could be finding something wrong with them, right? And so, and creating fights or reasons that they're no good, or self-sabotaging themselves, presenting themselves in a way that sets themselves up for rejection, right? Or, everyone has their different patterns of ending something without consciously ending something, right? Sabotaging it without consciously doing so. And what all of this is speaking to is that cliche that no one wants to hear, but we all know is true, which is that you can't really love or enter into relationship until you really have done that with yourself. Meaning you don't have to be a finished product. You don't have to feel like everything is healed, but you have to have come into some relationship with yourself of awareness and self-love and self-appreciation. So you aren't trying to get that from the outside, and your whole orientation around relationship is trying to fill this hole in you. The first thing you have to do is really be committed to filling that hole in yourself first. So then your relationship is not about filling a hole. Because if you do that, you're going to attract from your wounds, right? Which is not what you want to do.
Yeah. And most people are attracting other people with dysfunctional wounds. Right. So what if you have 2 people that have both, have trauma? I personally believe that both people have to be doing personal work. Both people. Right. Not just one. A lot of people say, oh, well, if one changes, that'll shift the dynamic to the other, and the other one will almost gain by osmosis. And I really believe that it's kind of like you're at a different frequency. If you're coming from a wound center, you're existing at a certain vibration. And if you're moving it up in frequency, how can you really sustain that lower vibration. You know, I feel that both people, and I just want to make it clear to people that are listening that this is not easy work. This is hard work, right? This is not something that you could go to a psychic or medium or have one intuitive session and have an intellectual understanding that you have trauma and have these patterns, and that is going to free you from it. That's not the case, correct?
Right. No, unfortunately, it's not. You could have a great epiphany with the insight of a good psychic or intuitive, right? Around your patterns. And sometimes it is useful to get a flash on a past life or something in this life that sometimes that can be helpful. But in general, then the rewrite of the pattern takes repetition and, deep insight and then repetition to really try to build that in. But what you were saying before, what were you saying right before that? I just lost my train of thought.
About having two people in a relationship, or
right.
You're normally going to have somebody else that has trauma. If you have trauma, it's gonna happen, or you're gonna be the one that has trauma, and then you're gonna have the codependent. You're gonna have the person who is the savior or the fixer. And I mean, I believe that, we get together to trigger and heal and move through these things. There's some people that just say, I'm not ever going to get in a relationship again and just do that relationship abstinence, but that's not going to help them either. So do you believe that two people who have trauma can work if they do the work?
Absolutely. And it can be a beautiful part of the healing process when someone is in that place where two people, usually the best that I've seen is when people have both already done some of their own work through other means. And then they come together, they're ready for relationship and having to work on that relationship, and really is what brings them to a new level of their healing, because a relationship is where things are really revealed, right? That's the closest person to you. So triggers and patterns that you have are really going to be revealed to you. Perhaps the other person can show them to you in a way that you couldn't see on your own. And actually, it can be a tremendous aid to healing if you can create a safe space for each other, right? That is a great gift. That's a great gift. But you're right that it can be hard to have two people that are both willing to do the work. And if I can speak to, kind of today's heterosexual environment, based on female and male conditioning, what has a tendency to happen is that a woman is often likely to take on the healing of her partner in addition to herself, because we are more in a space where culture and forces around us aid us in our healing, and men are more likely to be shut down in that way. And so a woman can sort of end up trying to take on her male partner's emotions and healing for him and do that work for him. And in the end, that doesn't help either partner. Yeah. So
when you're saying that people have a tendency to either go for that passionate relationship or go for the one that they're not attracted to the person, they feel safe. Obviously, if you're coming from a trauma bond perspective, you're going to identify with that intensity in the beginning. Be like, oh, I'm so connected. This is like the most connected. And then the real healthy person's not going to feel, they're going to feel like the slow burning flame and not the fireworks. So how does somebody in this situation know when they're just like blocking that like, I'm not feeling that intensity. I'm not feeling it. But it's really that they're just disconnected and aren't used to a healthy connection. How do they know? How do you know it's not just like they're not attracted because it's safe? Like, do you know what I'm saying?
No, it's very hard. It's a question that comes up a lot, because sometimes people have been in abusive environments. They actually find an edginess attractive, so they're attracted to bad boys, or that's kind of cliche, but someone with an edge, and they can't be attracted to someone who doesn't have that edge. In other words, they can't be attracted to a nice guy, right? And there can be that real problem, and then it's like, there has to be some faith that if you have a true friendship with someone, if you develop that you can develop passion, which studies show you can, right? That true intimacy and a satisfying sexual life long-term is really based on extremely strong communication, and it can be built over time. So we often have this cliche, like chemistry can't be built. You either have chemistry or not. But long-term studies of relationship satisfaction actually show that's not the case. Long-term sexual satisfaction is about communication, and really that comes from really deep friendship. So I am always an advocate for giving the nice person, the nice partner,
a chance. Yeah.
take time. And I understand,
Yes.
take time to get there. And with someone where there's a lot of fireworks, proceed very slowly and cautiously. Because when we have those fireworks, we usually tend to grasp on and do a lot of projection, and that can be a problem. So that's where I always that's how I always break it down.
All right. Well, there's a certain aspect of another thing that I wanted to talk to you about. What is Kundalini and what is awakening Kundalini, and what is Kundalini energy? Everybody hears that term, but what's Kundalini energy? What is that?
Yeah. Well, so there's several different kinds of energy that move through the chakras or move through our energy body. The two you'll hear a lot about are prana, which is linked more to health, right? It's our physical vitality. It's linked to the elements. It's linked to nutrition. It's linked to yoga, and then there's Kundalini. And Kundalini is the really spiritual growth energy. It's the energy of consciousness, of awakening. So in spiritual traditions that work with the chakras for the purposes of enlightenment, the Kundalini is what you're trying to activate, and there are particular processes for activating it. There's particular sequences, pranayama, breathing exercises, empowerments from teachers that are all designed to trigger the Kundalini. But in fact, the Kundalini is running through all of us all the time. And whenever you're going through, whenever you experience a phase of major growth, or have a spiritual or mystic experience, there has been some release of the Kundalini, which happens when it moves into the central channel and flows smoothly. So you could have many experiences like that, many peak experiences in your lifetime, linked to really difficult phases where you had a big epiphany, or spiritual experiences that you had where the Kundalini was really going, right? And spiritual traditions that work with the Kundalini consciously, you're trying to gain a lot of kind of control around that to build it up to a certain place where it is dissolving your karmic blocks, your obstructions. And so it speeds up personal growth if you're working consciously with the Kundalini. Now, the thing about Kundalini is it can be very intense. And so for individuals who've experienced trauma in particular, that intensity can actually be challenging, can trigger a sense of crisis if it's, kind of triggered too strongly. So it's just, I think it's important to proceed carefully and at a paced basis. The other thing about working with Kundalini is that grounding is so important. That anchoring in those lower two chakras is so important. If there's no grounding, it's like you can short wire, you can short circuit. Almost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about so much tonight, so much stuff that is so interesting. And I know there's people in the chat that are like, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. And they're identifying with these patterns that you're talking about and these centers that are blocked. It's like, I think we have to go back to the basics, go back to kindergarten and be like, they're probably wondering like, where do I even take that little first step to changing this? What do I do? What would you get like for those 5 different examples you gave of attracting those different types of people? A lot of people in the chat are probably like, yeah, what could they do to start the process of change?
Yeah. Well, for anyone who feels they have patterns of disassociation linked to that, a concentrated period of time focusing on the lower 2 chakras, the root and sacral. And that's a lot of my work in my books and on my website are about exercises that you can do that are safe to do on your own to increase that feeling of safety in your body and synchronizing your energy body in that root chakra to start building that up. It does need to be combined with insight work, whether you are working with a talk therapist or a healer, or you're journaling, or you're just talking with people, but a process of really coming to understand your practices, your patterns of dissociating from your body. What triggers it, and what do you do that's dissociative? Then in terms of relationship patterns, it's really about the heart. and working with the heart chakra. So if I were to say, what would I like everyone to start with? It would be root chakra and heart. Focus on it from a chakra perspective. Focus on your root chakra and your heart, and do that every day for 6 weeks and see what starts to happen. See what insights rise up into your mind about your relationship to being present, which is root chakra, and your feelings about how you seek validation from others in terms of your heart chakra. And do that work. And that would be the starting point for everyone.
Okay. And I can tell you that when I've had a lot of mentors over and I feel like I'd outgrow the one and then I go to the next level and keep going. And I remember she said, okay, well, let's just do a little exercise to get back into your body. I want you to just start touching your hands and your feet. And even that just a little bit of activation in my body, I completely went out. And she's like, wow, you're like, she's like, that was even too much for you. So with doing this work that you're talking about, would that be too much for some people, or is that a safe start?
Yeah, I feel in general, it's a safe start, but it is different for each person. And that really speaks to being trauma informed or trauma sensitive. I mean, the number one thing about working in a trauma informed way is really knowing what you can handle. I do find for many people that working with the chakras is actually less triggering than working with physical modalities at first. That's not true for everyone. For some people, it's exactly the opposite, right? But for some people, the type of people that tend to be drawn to maybe someone like you or me, they're already very energetically connected. So actually connecting with the root chakra and the tailbone, they wouldn't be able to do physical exercises or things focusing on their physical body yet. But just doing this like root bowl, I call it, where you imagine you're being held by the earth in a protective way, connected to your root chakra, is not triggering because it's partially in the imaginal astral mind. And so that's somewhat less triggering. And then it gradually brings you more into connection with your body. I don't think there is any modality, however, that is right for every trauma survivor. You really have to honor what works for you. And if you're triggered by something, it is not the right modality for you. Honor that. Keep looking.
Yeah. And I always tell people like this work can't be intellectualized. It can't just be, I'm going to intellectually understand it and it's going to go away, or I'm going to do it on my own. I really believe you have to have a safe person as a guide. I really believe that. And there's times where, and I have to put this out there, there's times where there are people that I've gone to that said, oh yeah, I'm trauma informed. They went to all these classes or did all this stuff, but they weren't survivors themselves. And so those relationships actually can trigger, I mean, sometimes it causes more harm than good. So you have to realize that you have to pay attention to how you're feeling when you're around people that you have to be vulnerable with, because sometimes it can trigger it in a worse way. So let's talk about your book. And is this something that what you had discussed doing this for 6 weeks? Is this something that's more explained in your book?
Yeah, absolutely. It's chakra empowerment for women. And it's not only about trauma, but what I've done in every chapter is include a section specifically on sexual trauma, but really a lot of it applies to any kind of trauma. But most of each chapter, it goes through each of the main 7 chakras is the first 7 chapters. And then there's 5 tools that use multiple chakras. You can do them in sequence, but you don't have to. You could focus in. You could jump right to the heart chapter, for example, if you wanted to, and just work with that exercise. And it's guiding you through a way of working with it daily energetically, and then also insight questions to bring in that self-awareness piece. But they're also meant to help you trigger things in daily life, like boundaries. There's like a boundary tool in there that with practice, you can learn to use during your day, right? As you need it, when you feel as if you're going into that people-pleasing mode where you might be taking on other people's emotions. So I think that's really my approach, and also to offer multiple access points. Like you can use the visualization, you can use affirmations, or you can use memories, whatever's the most comfortable for you to help you access different energies.
Okay, so for somebody that's watching this saying, everything she's saying makes sense, how can I start? Would reading the book be a good place to
Yeah,
start?
that's probably the best way to start to see if this approach works for you. And getting back to what you were just saying about different healers working for different people, you're the expert. Like each person out there, you're the expert in what you need. If something doesn't work for you, just stop. I say that at the end of my first chapter. Like, if this is not working for you, there's nothing wrong with you. This just isn't the right modality for you, and you will find the modality that works for you. And that is the message every trauma survivor needs to hear, because I do feel way too often, I've heard so many stories like this. Someone ends up internalizing the message that they're permanently damaged because a particular class or healer or approach didn't work for them. And it's just that they need a different access point.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really good to note. So people can also get in touch with you on Instagram and Facebook, Chakra Empowerment. And I'd love to open up the floor for those of you that have been listening. If you have a question for Lisa, you want to ask her, or you have a situation that you just want to know about in general, we're here. You can ask us. The floor is open to ask any questions that you need to ask. But all in all, I mean, I think everything you're saying is fascinating, and it's what will people like look forward to say, yes, this is a struggle, this is a lot of work, this is a lot of hard work. If you want to change your pattern, what's the result of the work? If people do the work, what's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow at the end of the day?
Experiencing life feeling safe more often, and because of that, more present and at ease with yourself. Old patterns, thought patterns related to feelings of shame or unworthiness or fear or self-doubt beginning to fade. And it really is a percentages game over time, right? You start to experience, maybe just in small glimpses at first, greater contentment, greater a vibration of safety in your body. And then that builds over time. And what really starts to happen, because our vibrational field does impact what we're drawn to and what's drawn to us, is that we start shifting our trajectory, right? And the choices we make. So now, if someone were to come to you for a reading before and after they've done this work, and you see these paths, you're going to see totally different paths. Right. Because our path is not a destiny, right? You're seeing the most, as an intuitive, you're seeing the most likely outcome based on their current state of awareness. But when you change your state of awareness and vibration, that path changes. So more, and it happens gradually, but it does happen. It does happen.
Well, we do have a question. Mary Matthews, does age limit your ability to change?
Ultimately, no. And on the brain level, we have discovered this. Science used to believe that the brain did not actually learn and change past a certain age. And then we discovered neuroplasticity. And we discovered, for example, that people with strokes, even in their 70s, 80s, could, through physical therapy, take function that was their right hand was controlled by this part of their brain. With therapy, they could actually start controlling their right hand from another part of their brain. That's called neuroplasticity, that your brain could still develop new neural networks, new neural pathways at any age. So we now know this to be true. On the brain level, you can still do it. Does it become more challenging? Perhaps you have more years of repetition of the old patterns, right? So it may take a little bit more effort to now change to those new patterns. From an energy work perspective, your subtle body is fluid and capable of change at any age. Again, you have more time with the old patterns, so it might feel more like you're walking uphill at the start, but you can still change at any age.
Yeah, we have that question. Marianne's like, yeah, I'm thinking I'm too old for it to matter, right? So this is kind of that sabotaging thinking. This is kind of like that trauma saying, you're not going to get rid of me. You can't do this. Those limitations, those limiting beliefs, and sometimes that gives us an excuse to kind of keep on going on with the same way. So yeah. The people that ask for age,
you need acceptance, because some certain things we do just let go of as we get older. Like, okay, it doesn't matter to me anymore. If it really doesn't matter anymore to you, good, that's freedom. But yeah, but thinking that you can't let go of things that are causing you pain. No, you can change those patterns at any age. And I've seen people do it.
And so another thing that people are probably thinking is, how do I find someone that does this work? You know, because that's a lot of what people ask me. Like, I could find a regular old therapist just fine, but how do I find somebody that can do the work you're talking about, Lisa? Because I know you're not doing any more, you know, one-on-one work. You just do classes and the book. So where would you give people, like, for a resource?
Well, I belong to an organization called the Breathe Network. It's a nonprofit. They specialize in they have a practitioners directory that is specifically trauma practitioners of all different holistic types, right? EMDR, neuropathway, biofeedback, massage therapists, and therapists of all different types, Reiki practitioners, energy workers like myself. So that's one resource. I do think there is a growing awareness of trauma healing within the mind, body, spirit healing community. So if you look for different types of healers, you are more likely to find someone who has some experience with trauma. Again, you always have to make sure you're comfortable with someone, you know, find a way to try them out or learn about them in a setting that's not too intense. But therapy is not your only option anymore. I think EMDR is very successful for a lot of people. EFT, emotional freedom technique, neural pathway work, biofeedback, Peter Levine, somatic work. Yeah.
Now, you know, a lot of people told me about EMDR, and the last show we had a big old discussion on EMDR because I had a crazy experience that was very scary with EMDR. Yes. And it was actually, it put me on a journey where I saw a lot of things that were coming in the future. It was crazy. A lot of people saw that last show, but for me, EMDR, the person that was on last week was a medical doctor, was an afterlife researcher and a psychologist. And he was helping PTSD survivors that lost people in the war. EMDR serving as a way to put them into a mediumship place to connect with that person that passed. And it was like healing their PTSD, but EMDR was the tool to get them into that state. So it was crazy what he was talking about. You know what I mean? But yeah, so
that's pretty intense. That's pretty intense.
Yeah. So
not everyone that's not going to serve everyone, that kind of intensity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I mean, I could talk to you offline about my experience another time, but that was, it, you know, didn't work for me, but polyvagal worked very well for me. And somatic work works very well for me. So it's just, I think a lot of people that do have trauma, they trust that somebody who says, oh, sure, I'm trauma informed. I went to a lot of seminars and now I have the title at the end of my name, trauma informed. And it's like, they take that risk of going to see somebody and it doesn't work out. And then they stop because it's like, they're re-traumatized. And it's kind of like, what I would say is just keep going until you find somebody that works for you. Don't let anybody, you know, stop you from finding the right modality for you.
I agree. And it is unfortunate that we're in this middle ground where, I mean, I've heard a lot of those same stories, you know, and we're in this middle ground. I do think we're getting better. Like, there's a growing awareness of what it really means to be trauma informed and how do you really hold a safe container for someone, right? You should feel in control. You should feel everything is your choice. You should feel that you can say no to anything someone is asking of you, right? In terms of any process, and that you can stop any process at any time. And I think part of it is that so much healing is one-on-one, and that in and of itself can be feel too intense to just be alone or even on a Zoom call face to face. I do a lot of my first sessions just phone, just audio only, because it's less threatening for people, right? So, but that, you know, not everyone's comfortable with that. So yeah, it's really knowing what you need and feeling empowered to honor that.
And can people get your book digitally? Like, say they leave the show tonight and say, hey, I want to read this book tonight. Do they have to wait for a hardcover or softcover, or can they just download it and read
Kindle.
it?
It's on Kindle and Nook and whatever all the other ones are, Apple, iTunes or whatever. It is available digitally on all the sites. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I mean, there was so much information tonight. I hope that didn't overwhelm anybody in the audience, but I think that if it inspired you to actually start your healing journey, then we did our job tonight. If that
I hope
inspired you.
so. I
Yeah.
hope so. And Marisa, thank you so much for covering this topic and for being a forward voice on trauma. It's so needed, as we both know.
Yeah, I didn't ever expect that as a medium, this would be part of the work I'm doing as well. But I really got to a point where I was seeing my clients cycle just way too much. And I was like, I'm not helping them past the point of predicting what's happening. You know what I mean? Or connecting them with somebody who passed. And that's so healing into itself as far as your grief goes. But it's not helping you live life here and, you know, completing your mission here. And I feel like we're not supposed to live in struggle every day. We're not supposed to live in anxiety every day. We're not supposed to live with the lack of presence every day. We're supposed to feel connected to ourselves. Like when we were little kids, I wanted that back for myself. I'm like, you know what? I'm looking to help other people, but do I have that connection? Do I have that sense of presence? Do I have those? I had external boundaries, but did I have the internal boundaries? Probably not. Physical manifestation of things down in the lower chakras, you know, like just not knowing what a freeze response was, being like, why? I want everything to be in order and nicely organized on my desk, but why, when I look at all the piles of papers, do I just sit there and stare and get overwhelmed by the intensity of the papers and I can't do anything about it? So people would say, well, you're messy. Well, no, I get overwhelmed by the piles. Like I freeze and I can't do any. And it's like, oh, it's like, are you really messy or are you, you know,
overwhelmed?
Are you overwhelmed? So it's just, I'm learning so much about myself that, you know, I beat myself up so much. We're all perfectionists, you know, you know, we should be doing this. We should be going, we should be doing, we should be producing, we should be, you know, get to that next level of achievement, that next level of success, you know, more money, more this. And it's like, I'm lucky I had, you know, the experience in life where I was able to go and get to some of those destiny points and realize that, oh, wow, this isn't it. This is not it. And that's scary to get to that place.
Well, you know what I also think comes out of energy work, and maybe you felt this is what happened, you know, whether you call it spirit or source or whatever you want to call it, whatever spiritual you have, I really believe, you know, inside we each have this part of us that is reaching for that light and alignment and healing, and it will come forth. And that's why I love working energetically, because part of the work is not, you know, you do all this work where you're going into your old patterns and your pain and healing and trying to rewrite. And then at another level, you're just trying to light yourself up, because if you can connect to this part of you deep down that is already that light, that spirit, it just brings forth a natural healing. It triggers your own capacity to self-heal. And that's really the beauty of it. So some part of you guided you eventually to the right sources. And I do feel that happens for all of us.
Yeah. It's like the tarot card, the Hermit, and he's like that little wizard that's just lighting your way one step at a time, because your body cannot process all that healing at once. It's too overwhelming. Like we heal in layers. So let the little hermit guide you, but one step at a time. And we'll just look at some of the things that people are saying tonight. Mary Ann says, I need to read your book. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
Saying, let's see. Carol is, she says, thank you very much. Very interesting. Regina is informative. Christina, thank you. This is a great topic. Christine, one step at a time. Matthew, send awareness of the freeze response is definitely something I need to learn more about. And that's so awesome that Angela Feel Heal and Deal. Thanks for the show. Very informative tonight. And we know about the age limit questions. Jamie, hi. Better late than never. Marianne, I can really identify with this. That's awesome. Hi, Cynthia, Mary. We're glad everybody's here. And I think it just provoked a lot of thought in people. And you know what? If they just take one little step toward that direction tonight, I think that I think people are going on the right path. So thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the lounge, and we'll see you next week. And you guys have a great weekend. Okay, bye.
Thanks, everybody. And